Well, welcome back to Chapter 3. This chapter is a particularly interesting chapter in that it deals with some teachings by a guy named Lee Cantor. It's very popular. It's been used in quite a few different classrooms. It has some methods that you may have some experience with. I think there's some things that you'll see here. And our PowerPoint here, it talks about, we're going to look at the basic principles behind this, look at what Cantor did. It looks at the rights of teachers and the rights of students. And yes, there are rights of teachers, and students have different rights too in there. And look at what role administrators and parents both have in managing a classroom. So as we go through this, keep that in mind. Lee and Marlene Cantor. Marlene is his wife, and he brought her in, but Lee Cantor primarily started this process. It is probably one of the most widely used models in the United States. I know of probably half or better of the classrooms in the schools where I have taught use this particular method, and you'll recognize it as we get into it. You may have already heard of the Cantor method. And when we look at the next chapter, I want you to be able to tell the difference between this method and the next particular one. And here, Cantor says the teachers have the right to set up these certain things like classroom structure to determine and request appropriate behavior. You can always request appropriate behavior, but sometimes you don't necessarily get it. But the teachers have the right to at least do that. To ask for assistance from the principal and the parents. Who are you going to ask first? Who are you going to go to first for support and assistance? The answer is the principal. Once the principal okays with it, if you go to the principal and say, I'm going to use the Cantor method to run my classroom, and are you okay with that? Then once you do that, then it's important that you contact the parents. That is why the parent letter in our classroom discipline plan is so important. It is one of your first and primary contacts with parents, and the appearance, the structure, the language, the grammar is so important in that parent letter. You want to make sure it's absolutely perfect when you send that out. Anything you send out. I've worked with a principal before who had to have that principal's initials on anything that got sent home to parents because the principal wanted to make sure that there were no misspellings, no words, because when a parent runs across that, some parents may not spot it, but many parents will if you use improper grammar or use the wrong spelling or use T-H-E-R-E instead of T-H-E-I-R. It causes them, and this is my favorite phrase, it causes them to suspect the quality of your education. And you don't want to give them a reason to do that, because if they suspect that, they may be suspecting the quality of education you're giving to their child. So talk to the principal, then contact the parents. And Cantor says you have to teach the students to consistently follow these rules and the directions so that they go through there. He says that students have a right to consistent limits. So this is always a problem with students. Novice teachers have a problem setting the rules one place and keeping it there, because you're always so afraid of finding, of setting a rule and then discovering that you set it too harsh or too loosely and then having to move it. And if you set it, it's like cattle. If you put a fence around an area, the cattle will stand at the fence and put their head through the fence to try to eat the grass outside the fence. The horses do the same thing. And it's the same thing with children. Their job as a child, as they're growing and learning, is to test the limits of things. And so if the limits are here one day because you're feeling good and relaxed, and then the next day you're not feeling too well and you jump down their throats the minute anybody gets out of line, they don't know where the limits are. So it's very important that you're consistent with that thing. They also have the right to a consistent encouragement, that they want to feel that you believe that they can get through this process, that you are sure that they're going to make it through this grade or through this class of a particular thing. And you have to teach them what is acceptable and responsible behavior. That's why it's so important for teachers to model that very thing. Next, these are three terms that Cantor uses: non-assertive, hostile, and assertive teachers. Obviously, the assertive teacher at the bottom, and you want to look and know these three different definitions. It's very important. The assertive teacher is the one you want to try to be, the one who clearly and firmly expresses their needs. The hostile teachers you've probably worked with, the ones who demean you, make you come out of the classroom feeling like a nothing. The non-assertive teachers are the teachers who go along to get along, and they just go, there's nothing specific. They don't tell you exactly where the limits are. You don't want to be that way either. The assertive teacher is the desired goal with this. You might want to stop and look at the tips from the field on page 45 in the text in there. Some interesting points. Have you ever heard a teacher say to a student in your observations, to a certain student, Johnny, are you making a good choice with what you're just doing there? Because it's teaching the student to self-evaluate their behavior. And that's an important process in their development. They're in the steps and the counter steps here. The first thing is you inform the key people. And we've talked about administrative and parent information. Then set your class rules. Now, counters say they should be about 5 and no more, because you don't want to have too many rules. If you remember the cartoon from chapter 2 that I showed you about all the board full of rules, so you don't want to have that either. They need to be observable and enforceable. It's almost like an objective. It has to be observable and measurable if you're going to do that throughout the day. And rules need to be, everything you do really needs to be age appropriate. Use age appropriate language, explain it to them in language they understand, use terms and words, and if you have to use a word that you're not sure everybody understands, you need to define that very plainly too, to help the students do it. You can do that by concept attainment, where you can even have students do demonstrations. I've used a classroom where I've had students who would model the misbehavior and then model the appropriate behavior. And the students love to do that. Of course, everybody wants to volunteer to model the misbehavior. But that's an important way for them to understand the classroom rules. Like I said, the rules should be limited 5 to 7 at most, and cover typical situations. You don't want to get too specific in your rules, because if you do, then the lawyers will come out with you and the students. Well, you told me to open my book, but you didn't say to open at that page. Things like that. So you have to teach the appropriate kind of classroom behavior. Here's some sample rules that you should look through. Things like do not talk while the teacher is talking, walk quietly and orderly in the hallways. Those are just simple rules. Sometimes we can have some. I like this one of bring all needed materials to class, because it covers everything. Whatever you need for class, you're supposed to bring. I told you about the teacher who had one rule that said behave, but behave didn't talk about bringing materials to class, coming to class prepared. And if bringing needed materials includes homework, then that's where you go to defining, okay, boys and girls, what does bringing in needed materials to class mean? And then explain that and help them understand that. Positive reinforcements. Now, helping a child understand or get something, we have to go into the rule of the law of effect, which means those things that get reinforced tend to get repeated. So you can use group rewards. Some of you may be familiar with the marble in the jar. Every time the class has done something good as a class, they get a marble in the jar, and when the jar gets full, they get some sort of reward. Now, that's a long ways off, and that's difficult for some students to remember. But you do want to have some long-term rewards as well as some short-term rewards. The marble in the jar thing could result in a popcorn party or get a movie day or something like that, or a no homework night, something that price. Individual rewards are the ones that really make a difference to a child, because you can personalize it and you can make it private and individual to a child. Things like praise, notes home. Let me talk about notes home. When I was teaching, I had my plan book and I had the list of students' names where I would check the attendance each day. And I would put, if I write a note home, I would put a little check mark to the side. And it was my goal to make every student have a check mark next to the side. And the first note that went home, an individual note that went home about that child, needed to be a positive note, saying, just wanted to let you know Susie did a great job all day today, and I'm very proud of her. I'm just really enjoying having her in class. It's simple as that. Take that, write that note, stick it in their folder that goes home. It makes a huge difference with parents, so that when you do have to contact them with Susie's been stealing pencils from friends today, or Susie's been pushing people in line, then they've already got this positive thing behind, and they're not afraid. They're not on the defense when you go with them. Think about that process. Tangible rewards can be treats and things like that, but I hate to make rewards and food connected together today in this world of overweight children. Special privileges could be things such as extra computer time, some extra reading time, not having to do homework on something if you are comfortable with the child academically. Things like that can be individual rewards for things. And you may be able to think of some others in there. Then you want to create your list of consequences, the negative, the response. If you break this rule, Cantor says, develop a hierarchy of consequences. In other words, from mild to extreme, or from the least consequence to the strongest. As I say, from you shouldn't do that to off with your head. So, and make that no more than 5 steps. So the first time they break their rule, they got this. The second time they break it, it's a little more, a little bigger response. So that you go through that process. They don't have to be severe to be effective. You don't have to cut off their heads or throw them out of school for the law to be effective. It just needs to be something that the student is going to perceive as something they don't want to have to come across. The challenge for a teacher doing this method is you have to apply the negative consequence every time the student chooses to behave inappropriately. You can't skip a time or skip a week because the impact of it is very weak. We can't record, used to in the years ago, we would record a student's name. If a student got in trouble for talking out in class, their name went up on the board in the corner over there as in trouble. I know because my name was in there a lot. In fact, it was in there so often that students would sort of wipe off the board around my name because they knew if they wiped it off, it would be back up there the next day. But nonetheless, we can't do that anymore. We have to keep privacy issues for our students. That's why some teachers use the number system on a clothespin clips that they use for moving up and down the scale, things like that. Or they have pockets where if a student misbehaves, if they've got treats in the pockets or fake money, then the student has to go pull a token and give it to you, which is something that indicates them. You want them to be able to physically do it. It impacts them a little stronger when they do that kind of thing. You can and you should probably keep up with the behavior in a notebook if you believe it's something that needs to be tracked. Here's some sample ones. You may want to stop a second and look at those. Notice that the last one is sent to the principal. But understand, every time you send the child off to the principal for disciplining, it tells the child that you don't have the discipline, you're not the one with the power, they are. And I don't know if that's a message you always want to send home to a child. But Cantor says you should create a severity plan. This is one where it's do not stop, do not pass, go directly to jail. This is where you say, whoop, this is the kind of thing where you need to be sent to the principal immediately. You skip steps 1 through 4 and go straight to step 5. That allows you to be able to have that option in there. Cantor says you need that if you're going to have this hierarchy. The difference in this process here is that the original one that Cantor created were not quite as sensitive to the needs and the backgrounds of students as the current ones are. The new version, if you'll see on this slide here, says that before the rules and consequences be effective, trust and respect must be present. In other words, you have to establish this sense of trust and respect between the students and between you and the student for you. The old version said that students always had a choice to misbehave. Well, we know these days of IUPs and students with emotional and psychological and learning academic problems that most students can behave, but some don't have a choice. And so he's had to modify that version. The original program said all children could behave, not that they must be taught to behave, but the new version says that teachers have to stress the behaviors they expect. This is what I said in class the other day about tell the students what you want. I need you not to be talking while I'm talking. That identifies the goal. Establish that. And also, he talks about distinctions between disruptive behavior and non-disruptive but off-task behavior. It can be non-disruptive, but they're certainly not paying attention to what you want them on. So you want them on task while they're doing theirs in there. Second thing, track it in a private way, as I said before. Originally there was no way to deal with the difficult child other than to send them to the principal. But the new version of Cantor's method has ways to deal with difficult students and things like that. The old program had to focus on the rules. They focus now on the difference between rules and procedures or directions. This is how we do something, as opposed to rules versus just rules being the only way to operate in a classroom. The good side of this is that it's fairly simple. You got your 5 rules, you have your 5 consequences, or 6 or whatever, and the students can understand them. It's very simple, and you can always point to it. Most effective way is to put it up on a chart on the board, and you can use that. It is always rules. Anything that you do with a child needs to address their behavior. You do not want to put down the character of the child. the basic worth of the child. You want to be angry at or upset at, or but the rules are their behavior, so that you can explain to them, I love you, but I do not love what you just did. And because of that, here's your consequence. So that they understand, I'm still good, but what I did is wrong, and I need to change that. That's the part that will work with Cantor's method. Make sure you keep the parents and administrators involved, and it says balance of positive and negative consequences. In other words, you want to have some rewards that balances as much as some consequences, some negative consequences, to make sure that you're not just talking about the don't, but reward some of the good things in there. How can the Cantor method with the 5 rules and the 5 consequences be frightening to young children? What is the process? Think about that. Why would a young child be frightened in case of running across a set of rules they have to follow and a set of consequences that will come if they break those rules? And we may discuss that in class the next class. And older students, I can see that now, because Cantor's method is very much like this behavioral management in there, where you say, you can imagine saying to a group of middle school students going down the hall, going to the gym, saying, I like the way Susan's walking in line. And middle school students and high school students would laugh at you. So some of these things in these methods tend to lean themselves more toward elementary classes than toward the upper classes. However, you can still have rules and consequences all the way up through high school, because I know it works. So that part is available still. The downside of it doesn't deal with the root of the problem. If the problem is an academic or an emotional problem or a blood chemistry problem, some other type of thing, then your rules and consequences really are not going to matter with that child. So find some other way to be able to deal with that, and that's where Cantor's plan falls short. As a wrap-up, we have this: read the summary in the chapter, look at the key terms, make sure you know what the severity plan is, things like that. Look at the tables in there and the developing your personal philosophy on page 60 in here. And then we'll be off to chapter 4. See you next class. Bye-bye.
Let them be little.